happy Wednesday afternoon, everybody. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. October 9th, it marks a lot of things going on in Razorbacks basketball, really starting today, including today, and moving ahead now as we are now getting full swinging into exhibition season. Recruiting season has really picked up at Arkansas. I had planned to join everybody earlier today, 10:30 in the morning, like I typically do. Had some other stuff come up, so I'm happy to do this in the afternoon, but I hope you're able to join me today. And thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. I'm Kevin McPherson. If you haven't done it already, please go hit subscribe and like, and then share the content if you like it. But we've got several things. And when we look at just October 9th, this is Arkansas's Pro Day, where 30 NBA teams are expected to be in today for practice. But it's a pro day, so it's not your typical practice. And so I'm sure there'll be some measuring skill stuff, athleticism things that they do when they're looking at standing verts, max verts, measuring maybe reach and wingspan and things like that. They'll probably have some 5-on-5 scrimmaging. That's typically how these goes. Now, this is John Calipari, and he hasn't told us more than today's pro day, so we don't really know. And until I get some feedback on it, we'll learn exactly what Arkansas is doing inside the Performance Center with that. But it's also a day. Today marks the beginning of a planned visit by top-rated 2025 prospect. I've talked a lot about him on these segments. I've tweeted about him. Sean Abayev, a 6'7" combo guard, really a 1, 2, and 3. I mean, I think he's going to be recruited and projected as a wing that can play on the ball some. You remember last year, Tremont Mark. I'm not saying this is the same kind of player. He is a lefty, and they're similar size. Abayev's bigger, not only physically, but a little taller at 6'7". But Mark was really a 3, a wing that you could run a lot of ISO ball through and run some of your offense through. So Abayev's one of those guys that he's a 3, but you could actually play him on the ball some because of his versatility. But he's set to begin an official visit to Arkansas today through Friday, the 10th through the 12th. The 9th. Today's Wednesday, the 9th. Where am I getting this messed up? It starts today. I had his dates wrong, I guess. It's the 9th or the 11th. I need to look at that. He's either arriving today or the visit actually starts today. But he's supposed to be in Northwest Arkansas sometime today. And because of the bad weather that's hitting or about to hit in Florida, expected with Milton, this visit was altered a bit to be more of a midweek visit. So that's something to keep an eye on with Sean Abayev. He's already taken visits to Syracuse. He's visited Auburn. I think he took a visit way back when to Dayton. Here's a guy whose recruiting has really picked up with the high majors and some of the bigger programs because of his push and his development and what he was showing against some 5-star guys. He's moved up in the recruiting rankings. He's now inside the top 30. I think this guy's as good as some of the 5-stars in a loaded 2025 class. I think there are 5-star qualities about him. I watched him closely in the Under Armour. It was an all-star game, Elite 24 Elite Next 24 game about 6 weeks ago, maybe a couple of months ago. And he was the MVP of that game. He had 22 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds, almost a triple-double, but he played mostly as a lead guard and was just picking and choosing. He made great decisions, like some of these big point forwards that we've seen in the past. Anthony Black size, maybe you could say, kind of comparing physically to Anthony Black, former Hog, who was a 5-star and a one-and-done now with the Orlando Magic. But whereas Black always projected as a lead guard at the college game, I think Abayev, they're looking at him as a wing who can do lead guard stuff. So again, a versatile guy. And some people think Auburn's maybe the front runner here. I still keep an eye on Syracuse, some other places he intends to visit. He's taken several, including USC. Southern Cal was one he was on campus a while back. But again, if it's Calipari and you're getting a player like this on campus, it means something. And you say, well, isn't that true of every visit? Yes, except I think the difference is in a lot of schools, they're casting such a wide net because they're hoping to get a few guys. Calipari does a little bit differently. He knows who he wants. He expands it a little bit. And so if he's only going to take 3 or 4 and he ends up having 8 visitors in, that's probably scaled down where a lot of schools will have more visitors hoping to get 2 or 3 of that caliber of player, or maybe only 1 of a similar caliber. So Calipari's a little bit different. You have to look at his recruiting a little differently. And I think if he's bringing a player on campus, it means he is very serious about wanting that player to be part of his program. And it's not a, well, maybe I get him, and if not, and if I'm really not in it, at least there's some optics and it looks good that they're visiting my school. His is just completely different because he is the blue blood of coaches when it comes to recruiting high school players. So I always look at these with a different perspective now, because you're always serious about that your chances with a player if you can get them on campus for a visit. But with Calipari, though, to me those percentages increase because he's not letting them come in as a maybe. It's like Arkansas is going to be in the mix there, and he's as good a closer as there is. And so you say, well, Arkansas just had Malik Thomas on campus over the weekend. We spent a lot of time on our last segment, our Midnight Madness special, going over how the third time was the charm. He postponed previous visits. We didn't know if he'd ever make it to campus until he did, and then he did. And I said it on that segment. I'll say it again. I think Arkansas is the leader there. I have a source. I've mentioned this. I'll just repeat it because I followed up with him, and he's like, "I told you." I'm like, "Well, you told me it hadn't. There's no commitment yet, and as far as I know, there's no private or solid commitment." But this one source says, "Look, once he makes it to Arkansas, he is going to get there. Whatever visits he takes, the dust settles. It's going to be Arkansas." I've had other folks not as sure. They feel more inclined to think Arkansas is the leader as well now, some that I've followed up with. But I always keep an eye on this upcoming visit to Kansas State. And if there becomes a leverage game with NIL, there is a scenario where Arkansas doesn't end up with Malik Thomas, because I think as good as Arkansas's position is with NIL, they will have stoppers and limits with anybody they're recruiting if it exceeds where they think it should be. And even with some of these five-star top 10 rated players, with certainly Malik Thomas, remember he was on campus with Arkansas, national top 10 player off the board to Arkansas, Darius Acuff Jr. And so we were talking so much about how they would complement each other at the 1 and the 2. Bringing in Sean Abayev doesn't compete with any of that. Again, this guy I think projects as a 3, a wing at the college level who can handle the ball some and give you versatility. Let's dial it back, just like I did on the Midnight Madness special, and remind everybody, just last year at Kentucky, you had freshman guards on the court all the time. You had 2 that went in the NBA draft lottery, going 3rd and 8th overall. Then you had Antonio Reeves, a transfer, who was a bigger guard, who often was your 3, but he would handle the ball too, and offense would run through him. A lot of times he was your 3 because you had 2 other freshman guards on the court with him, kind of that 1, 2, 3. You effectively had 3 playmakers on the court all the time, and it helps explain why Calipari's offense was ranked in the top 10 last year in the nation, because you had some really good players on the offensive end sharing duties. It wasn't just one primary ball handler all the time. And so I think get used to that idea with some of the talent that Calipari's eyeballing, and you don't look at a Sean Abayev coming in as an either or with a Malik Thomas. I think you're looking at adding another piece. If you're going to go 3 or 4 guys, a solid 1, 2, 3, and then some versatile player that can maybe defend multiple positions and slot in as a combo forward, maybe a stretch 4. And we're going to talk more about what Calipari's been doing lately on that end in terms of those kind of players. We've already mentioned the names a lot, but I'm going to get to them here in a little bit. But I want to get back to Sean Abayev because, again, I mentioned all of his versatility. I mentioned his physicality and size. I'm very impressed with how he plays with his own pace, and he doesn't get rattled by situations. He just stays within his pace and just sort of dictates what he wants to do, and he's a problem because of his size and because of his skill level. The fact that he's unflappable and one of those guys that just goes about his business, you look up and he just continues to make plays, and there's a calmness about that. And man, he was impressive. I mean, he was in that same All-Star game that I mentioned with Nate Ament, who we're going to talk about, a top 5 rated 5-star in this class that Calipari all of a sudden has made a priority out of. I've been reporting on that. We're going to talk more about it. But this All-Star game had a bunch of really high-level guys, not only in 2025, 5-stars, but some high-level players from the class of 2026. And Abayev, that's just one performance of several where he's really raised his stock. Again, I think this is probably a top 20 worthy rating should be for him in a full 5-star rating. I think his highest rating right now is 29th. He's just inside the top 30. These things change, so we'll see what happens there. All right, 10 minutes in. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We are going to keep an eye on this Abaya visit through the week because our Calipari and Arkansas have a lot going on. Again, starting today with Pro Day. Calipari was scheduled tomorrow to be in Little Rock for the Little Rock Catholic Alumni Dinner as a guest speaker. I've reported on that for a couple of weeks now. Does this new visit and the fact that it was moved because of the weather issues in Florida, getting Abaya on campus, does that impact Calipari being able to keep that appointment? I only bring it up to say you might have to make adjustments there, and I don't know. Calipari seems like someone, when he makes a commitment, he keeps it. So he's going to have that stuff to juggle. If in fact Abaya, I saw one report said, look, the schedule is he's coming in starting today to begin a visit, but he may very well that's if weather permitting, and so we'll see if that even impacts his travel and if this visit happens. But it's planned, and so I've not heard anything to this point that it's not happening. But again, this is a guy we've talked about for a while. I interviewed him a few weeks ago. Chuck Martin had been out to see him. We were talking about it. He's like, man, I'm just waiting for Cal and Coach Chuck to get back with me and get this thing moving to the next stage so I can set up a visit, because he fully intended to visit Arkansas. He has interest there. And then that happened. I mean, I think after I tweeted that out and tweeted his quote, quoted what he said to me about that. I think it was later that night or the next day, Calipari and Chuck Martin made plans to go out and see him, and they did that. And now we've got this visit scheduled. And again, keep an eye on some of these other schools that have already had him on campus. There's other visits he may take, but we're getting here in crunch time, where the early November period's now a month away. I think it runs the 13th to the 20th, so we're about a month out from that. So we're going to really pay attention now to some of these players coming in. If you think about it, it was real quiet with Arkansas visits. It was ACUF in May with high school visitors. And then it was Arkansas didn't get anybody on campus on that first football weekend, September 13th, or the 14th, that weekend, when Arkansas hosted UAB, Alabama, Birmingham. For football, several visitors were playing. None showed up. Mika Murinen, the 6'10", 6'11" combo forward from Finland, did make the first visit since ACUF, and did that in late September when there was no game on campus. Arkansas had a football game on the road at Auburn, and Murinen was in for his visit. He may reclass to 2025. I gave you guys source info on that he has said Arkansas was his best visit out of the ones he'd already taken, comparing it, I guess, to Utah and Michigan. The weekend after the Arkansas visit, he canceled a visit to Duke and didn't go to that. Okay. Anything new on Malik Thomas? Well, I just went through some of the stuff on Malik Thomas. Thank you for the question. Just to repeat it, I still think Arkansas is in the lead. I have a source that I keep repeating this, says when the dust settles, he's Arkansas. I'm saying keep an eye on that visit to Kansas State. I mean, maybe he cancels it. Maybe he doesn't go. He's canceled other visits. He had an Alabama visit that he didn't take. And that was the weekend prior to this Arkansas visit that he just took and did have. And that was the third time that was the third scheduled visit he had, and he made it. So we don't know what he's going to do next. He's got a visit scheduled for the end of October, the last weekend in October, to Kansas State, a team that's on his Final Seven list. So does he end up, he's got his mind made up and it's going to be Arkansas? Remember, I did give you some intel during the Midnight Madness special that I was told that visit was exceeding expectations. They had high expectations. It was a high energy anticipation. I knew he was excited about Calipari. I've interviewed this young man, seen him play, and Malik Thomas. I'm told the visit was even better than they thought it would be. It was going really extremely well. So, all signs point to Arkansas. I said that night, on that Saturday night when we did that special Saturday night, Sunday morning, while it was in mid-visit. But getting back to Murinen, he was the first visitor since ACUF in late September. And now we've seen kind of a flood of visitors. You've got this past weekend, again, it was ACUF and Thomas. Even though ACUF's committed, that you're helping sell that recruiting picture of why it's important that these guys can be together, play together, and be a backcourt, and not that there's something where they're going to knock heads in terms of exposure, impact, production, and those things, where they'll actually complement each other. Something I've said for a long time. I see that very clearly based on the way they play. Now, again, Abaya coming in this midweek, and I butchered the dates. I think I tweeted the wrong dates. It's supposed to arrive today, leave Friday. I think I put the 10th through the 12th, but today's the 9th, and that's what messed me up. And so I think it's actually the 9th through the 11th. But either way, that's another complementary piece to the two guys we've been talking about in Acuff and Malik Thomas since Saturday. Would be a piece to play with them, not an either or situation. And it's not to say you're going to get both. It's to say that when you look at it, don't think of it in terms of this is plan B. No, these guys, when you look at how you picture them for this college level, for this high major level, they would actually be 1, 2, 3. And we'll see how things work out with this first freshman class, technically, that Calipari brought with him over from Kentucky, because those were high school players who are going to be true freshmen. But you've got 3 backcourt guys that were all some level of 5-star between Boogie Flan, Carter Knox, and Billy Richmond. And there may be scenarios where they're on the floor together 1, 2, and 3 at some point. So again, I'm looking at it like that with Abayev. Now there's some other stuff going on this week. Again, a busy week. I said that I measured it starting today. With the pro day and this Abayev visit, if it happens starting today. Thank you for your coverage, Razorback basketball, Kevin. You're our go-to guy. Thank you for the comments. Some of these I can see. I've got my glasses perched up here. I have to lean in. I have to make these weird faces trying to read them, and half the time they come up and fade away fast. All right, so let's look at what else has been going on this week. Just yesterday, Calipari and associate head coach Chen Coleman were back at Link Academy to see Chris Sinak Jr., the 6'10", 6'11", top 10 rated, another chart climber, by the way. Going back to the spring, he was kind of hovering 50-ish, or out at one point he was outside the top 100. He's just risen all the way up to top 10. And he's at Link Academy up in Branson, not far from Fayetteville. Calipari and associate head coach Chen Coleman were back out there to see him. I spoke with the director of his AEU program. We call it it used to be called AEU. I call it grassroots hoops, spring and summer play. He played on the Puma Next 16 Pro 16 League event. It's a rising circuit, just outside the top 3 when you talk Nike, Adidas, and Under Armour. That's the next one, and they've added a lot of good players, and he's one of them. He's a 5-star. Last year they had Asa Newell on that circuit, a 5-star that'll be a freshman at Georgia. But anyway, Sinak, Calipari was back out to see him yesterday. He's been out multiple times to Link. I've reported in the past that Sinak was planning to visit Arkansas on that first football weekend in September, mid-September. That didn't happen. Then we were confirmed the October 18th through 20th date. Well, the football team has a bye this weekend, and then they come home the following weekend. That's the 18th through the 20th, Friday through Sunday. So on the 19th, Saturday, Arkansas hosts LSU. Sinak's one of multiple visitors that are due in that weekend for an official visit to Arkansas. Then I see other people reporting his visit list lately, and that those dates are no longer up there for Arkansas. They fade just kind of like they did before. I'm told that for now, that's the plan. That weekend is still the plan. So we'll see with Chris Sinak Jr. But you believe that because Calipari continues to go make a priority out of him and continues to go see him on these over-the-road recruiting visits. So they hit Branson yesterday, Tuesday, to go see him. And then Arkansas, then Calipari was also back in Virginia to see Nate Ament. Now this is key because Ament is a player that really had been kind of quiet with him, especially in terms of Arkansas. And 2 weeks ago, I was driving back from Jonesboro. I went to cover Jonesboro High School basketball, and I talked about this story. I told you guys this story, and I was driving back from Jonesboro, and I got a phone call from one of my basketball sources saying, hey, I haven't seen anybody put this out. Calipari was in today in Virginia to see Nate Ament. And so as soon as I got pulled over, I got home. I don't remember when I did it, but that same night I got home and I tweeted that Calipari was out to see Nate Ament. Now, he was a guy when I saw him back in May in Texas, and Calipari was there. I was there watching him and watching Calipari watch him in that first live eval period back in May. And I interviewed a man after the game. And he said, yeah, I'm already hearing from Arkansas's new coaching staff. Remember, Calipari had just been hired in April. This was mid-May, and he'd already heard from him and had interest. But at that time, he was ranked 18th in the country. He was a 5-star, and I was looking after watching him that day and through the weekend. I'm like, that guy, there's not 10 players better than him. There may not be 5 better than him. That was my thinking process. 6'9", fluid, skilled, just a high-level three-point shooter. I mean, efficient, volume guy. You can play two-man with him because he passes well out of that. He reads right. He plays within himself. I've seen him in a couple of all-star scenarios where he did well, but maybe he forced a little bit trying to, because a lot of those all-star games you see that. But the real player, the guy that I saw playing in true team scenarios, played the right way the whole time. But he reminds me of Michael Porter Jr., one of the top players in the NBA and a starter with the Denver Nuggets. He helped that organization win an NBA championship with the Joker and that crew, Jamal Murray and all those guys 2 years ago, one of the top teams in the NBA now. But he reminds me of Michael Porter Jr. He's about 6'10", but stretches the floor with that quick release from three, and it's deadly. He's a sniper like that, and he's got all the other great court awareness, good passer, and again, his timing and movement off setting screens or slipping screens or short rolls, everything he does, he has a high understanding of the game. Love the kid. And he is now a top 10. He's ranked third by some services. That's how much he moved up since the spring. Nate Ament. Okay, fast forward to 2 weeks ago. I'm driving back. Tomorrow will be 2 weeks. It's been 13 days. I'm driving back from Jonesboro, and I get that call that Calipari was out to see him. I tweeted that out. Well, that was kind of under the cover of night. I mean, not just because I was driving back at night. It was dark out, but no one knew about that. I tweeted that out. Well, today, Jamie Shaw with On3 Sports reported that Calipari was back out on Tuesday, yesterday, to see Nate Ament in Virginia. And then he, in his same blurb that he put on it, he said, this is the third time in the past 2 weeks. Well, 2 weeks ago was when the first visit happened, and I reported that. So Calipari is now making a priority out of Nate Ament. I fully expect Ament, I guess this could blow up. He's taken a few visits. He's got some scheduled out. And I mean, so this looks like the way I think, unless I misread something, some of the ones he's got scheduled would push him outside of the early signing period. So this may be someone who plays it beyond the early signing period, unless he falls and takes a visit before the early signing period, falls in love enough to commit, and then the other stuff's off the table. That could always happen. Things change in recruiting. NIL, we say it all the time. I think NIL is the one thing to keep an eye on. We may not get specifics, but if something goes south with Malik Thomas and ends up being Kansas State, I will be the first to say it was because of an NIL thing, and that's it. And Arkansas has a stopping point. And they should for every player. I saw it when Arkansas. We talked about some of it when Arkansas was portal recruiting in this first class, and some of that came into play. In Arkansas, there were places with certain players where their valuations were, we have the money, but we're doing things our way. And Calipari's going to get great players. So it's not like it's if you don't, like in the past in the program, like where Arkansas has been really good, and other than 2022 where they got 3 one and done 5-stars, typically if you missed on a 5-star, well, then you missed on all your 5-stars. You weren't going to get maybe more than one. That's typically how it is for a lot of programs year in and year out. It won't be like that going forward with Arkansas with Calipari. So, but I get back to NIL. You wonder, is a Nate Ament going to stretch it out and see how much he can grow that? Does he just want to take his time and not make a decision now? His recruiting did start a little bit later, but he is a priority. Chris Sinak Jr. is a priority. What did I say? Sean Abayev coming on for midweek visit. If you're targeted ACUF on board, check that box. Lead guard Malik Thomas projects to me as an elite too. By the way, Malik yesterday, 26 points, 7 rebounds, and 4 steals at overtime elite in an exhibition game. But the way that's structured and set up, they've already started playing some of their preseason games, and so it was legit 5-on-5. I guess it won't count on whatever record they keep. But I think his team won, but he had a big game. But getting back to it, so Abayev you're targeting him for the 3. When I look at guys like Nate Ament, I think in the NBA, he's got to get stronger. I've seen him struggle a little bit. The more he tries to get into the lane and battle, just with physicality, he's got all the soft skills. He's got great length. He's got nice athleticism. It's not that he can't finish. It's just that he's movable. And then sometimes when you're movable, it's harder to finish the contact or get closer to the basket when you do drive. So I think those are things he needs to add to it. I say that to say, because when I project him position-wise, probably at the NBA level, it'll be like a Michael Porter Jr. if he's in a system like Denver runs, where he is a 3-4 combo and plays some 3, but also can play some 4. And there's a lot of floor spacing and a lot of 5 out. So he's going to, he's so versatile because of his skill set in that 6'9" frame. Like I said, he needs to add some weight and get stronger as he progresses, but he will. So at the college level, I project him as a 3-4 and maybe a stretch 4 as he gets a little stronger. And so you could see how these pieces would fit together, and it's not an either or scenario in terms of battling for the same position with like a Sean Abayev and a Nate Ament. You could make an argument, well, Ament's going to be a 3 even at the college level, and so maybe but to me, Calipari's been great at even bringing players together that you could argue play similar positions. He just does. And so there's more than one way to skin this. But if you start looking at Chris Sinak Jr., he's versatile. I mentioned 6'10", pushing 6'11". I think he's more of a stretch 4 for the college game. Some people think he'll be a 3-4 in the pro game. Maybe he can help a little bit as he gets stronger, even at the 5 in the college game. I don't know. We've said LSU might be the leader there. That may still be the case. Kentucky's one of the teams in the top pecking order for him. He's taken other visits. I think he took one to Houston not that long ago, and was at Kentucky. So you keep an eye on this stuff, but these players of similarity, because we go back to Caleb Wilson now. We go back to Caleb Wilson, the 6'9" combo forward in Holy Innocents. It's been real quiet publicly. He's kind of piecemealing his visits. Something interesting, though, because a couple of things. One is Calipari was out to see him last week. The school tweeted out, Holy Innocents, thank you, Arkansas, for coming in. I checked. It was Calipari who was back in Atlanta to see Caleb Wilson. Again, Calipari's not doing these things unless there's a visit or there's one in the works. But with Wilson, there's been one that's been planned for a long time. And if you go back to before the Rich Paul Klutz partnership happened in mid-July, around that time as a lead up, we were still talking about after that, Arkansas was not only thought to be by many to be the leader, but at some point I told you guys that he's got a visit. He's got some dates he was looking at. I think he's solid on one. I couldn't talk about it. I have to keep that, but it was post-September. I've had no one tell me to the contrary to this point, but there's not been anything that's come out publicly. Now, here's what I've seen happen. If you go back to when I interviewed him and he talked about his conversations with Acuff about playing together in college, one of the things he told me was he gave me the 5 schools he was definitely visiting. And it was Arkansas, Oregon, Tennessee, Duke, and Georgia Tech, his hometown school. He pops into that campus a lot for unofficial stuff. But he said that. Right around the time he hired Rich Paul and Klutz, shortly after that, visits publicly announced, and it was not to one of those 5 schools. They were September visits to Kentucky and Alabama. Well, he didn't take the Alabama visit. I think he rescheduled it. I don't know if it's come and gone when he rescheduled it for. I don't think he's made that visit. I think what he's done and said is he did visit Kentucky. We've talked about that. One of my sources that thought Arkansas was in the lead there then said, no, I think Kentucky might be the team to beat now. But a lot of people said that. Then he has since taken a visit to North Carolina. That was this past weekend, talking about Caleb Wilson. But one of the things that is interesting to me is I see that Oregon continues to come watch him practice. Arkansas does. Tennessee does. Tennessee was one of those original 5. It has now gone public that he will visit Tennessee. I think it's this coming weekend. I think that's the plan. So that's the only one of the original 5 he said that he was definitely visiting that's now emerged publicly as a visit date. So I think what he's doing is maybe he's taken some of the schools that came in that weren't on that initial 5, and he decided, yeah, I'm going to go there and visit. And maybe he's now getting to the 5, and then the Arkansas will play out, and he'll let that go public when he's ready. That's a speculation. I don't know that, but maybe it's something like that. Maybe it's playing something like that. So we'll see with Caleb Wilson. But what we do know is the fact that Calipari was back out there tells you that Arkansas is not letting go of that. But it also tells you when you look at him, when you look at Chris Sinak Jr., again, Sinak's scheduled to come in October 18th to the 20th. We'll see if that happens. But if you look at him and Nate Ament, you've got versatile frontline guys. And when I say frontline, anything from small forward, wing to stretch 4. Caleb Wilson, to me, can defend 5 positions. That's how good he is defensively. I'm not saying he could sustain a full game of guarding a 1 or a 2 or sustain a full game guarding a 5. But he's switchable and he can defend up to 5 positions on the court. That's saying a lot. Justin Smith was one of those guys for a minute at Arkansas. and had to do some of that. I mean, he's that versatile in terms of defensive part of it, but he's 6'9" with all that length, athleticism. His offense is emerging. He's a top 5 rated player in the 2025 class. So is Nate Ament. So is Chris Enack Jr. These are all top shelf 5-stars that plug in somewhere in your front line. So if you're looking at Acuff, a Malik Thomas, and even a Sean Abayev, and now you're talking about these other guys. And let's just run real quick. Let's remind everybody that Arkansas also has 2 more visitors scheduled for the weekend of October 18th to the 20th. One of them we've talked about, Kingston Fleming's a 6'3" point lead guard out of San Antonio. Arkansas's in his final 5. I think he's got a visit this weekend scheduled to Gonzaga, then that following weekend, 18th to the 20th, to Arkansas, along with Enack Jr. Again, a top 20 rated. I think he's 18th in the composite of 5-star lead guard out of San Antonio. He's also got 3 other Texas schools in his final 5 in addition to Gonzaga and Arkansas. So 3 Texas schools. I believe that's Houston, Texas Tech, and Texas. He's visited those places already. Doesn't mean that he won't be back to visit, even if it's more informally on unofficial, to some of those schools closer to where he lives in San Antonio at some point. But he's still at this point scheduled to visit Arkansas October 18th to the 20th. A new visitor, because it was J.J. Andrews, class of 2026, in-state Little Rock, ESPN 15th ranked 5-star. I reported recently, and I've talked about it in the last 2 segments, but we'll just remind everybody, he no longer is visiting Arkansas that weekend. He's told me, and I put his interview video out via Twitter and HogvilleNET, I think last week, that he's going to try to schedule it sometime soon, but maybe during basketball season, where he can be on campus when the Razorbacks are playing a basketball game. And he's done that before in terms of unofficial visits. So we'll see when that gets solidified and what that date is at some point. He's already started taking some visits, but he's not going to be there that weekend. But Arkansas still, as it looks now with Enack and Fleming's, until I know otherwise, that's 2. There'll be now there is still a 3rd expected to come in. Andrews out, and the new guy is Devin Cleveland, class of 2027. So an incoming sophomore. He's in Chicago. Most of the recruiting services don't have rankings on him yet, except ESPN does. They've got him ranked as the 11th best prospect in the 2027 class, a 5-star recruit. He's picking up offers. He's starting to take some visits. It'll be an unofficial visit. I don't think he's eligible to take official visits yet. So I believe that'll be an unofficial visit October 18th to the 20th. So Devin Cleveland, keep an eye on him. Go check his highlights out. I reported that a couple of days ago. And I think one of the national guys a few minutes later reported that. I think he's also got a visit set. I was told Iowa State. I didn't put that in my tweet, but I had that information too. I think that's either, I don't know if it's this week. I think it may be after the Arkansas visit, the weekend after that, but it's still early. It's a class of 2027. Some other news that it's not really news. There was a tweet yesterday about a 7-footer. One of the national guys said that this young man, Arafan, I'm going to butcher his name, I don't know how to pronounce it, out of Canada. Diane is how I would say his last name, Diane. It's probably pronounced some other way, but Arafan Diane, best I can do there. Some services list him 6'11". He's on his Twitter page. He's got himself listed at 7'1". I gave him the different 7-footer when I tweeted it today, but he told me back in July that Calipari had offered him. What he told me was, when we were messaging each other, the head coach that Arkansas had offered him. And so someone else reported yesterday as though it was a new offer. I just retweeted that and said, look, this actually happened back in July. But that's another player to keep an eye on. He's rated by one service only in class of 2026, by the way. Plays at Iowa United Prep, and he's rated only by one service on 3, and they've got him ranked the 40th recruit, a 4-star. And when I tweeted this out earlier today, just kind of setting the record straight, actually this offer came back in July, someone commented and said, what, a 4-star? Cal's offered a 4-star. 7-footers don't grow on trees. And so, and you know, some of these things, Arkansas is going to keep an eye on the progress of players, their development. You know, it may be a situation, obviously, where I think with Calipari, there's no committable offer unless there's a visit set up, and Arkansas is going to control those. I think, again, with Arkansas and Calipari, there's less hoping players come to visit, and you keep working and working and working, trying to get them on campus, and then you hope, you know, you're going to get them. With him, it's about there's a selectivity there, And once you're in his wheelhouse and you're getting offers and he's setting up visits for you, I think there's a lot of players hoping that they end up landing with Calipari. So again, I don't want to be arrogant about that. I just think the proof's in the pudding. It's how it's been. It's not that he's the, I mean, Krzyzewski and Duke is still recruiting at a high level. There are other schools that recruit at high levels. There are other 5 stars going to places. There are other schools doing a good job of developing players who aren't 5 stars, and it's helping them have a winning brand. I mean, you look at UConn. UConn's gotten some 5 stars, but some of their better players these last couple of years in back-to-back national titles weren't all that highly rated necessarily compared to some other guys. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. But if we're talking about high-level 5 stars, Calipari's always going to get his share. And we're going through the process now, what that looks like at Arkansas. To me, he said he was moving the headquarters, and he's backing that up. We're 35, almost 36 minutes in. I typically spend, when I do this and talk about the program and other things going on, I spend a good chunk of it on recruiting, usually about this much time. Right now, there's really not anything I've got extra to add other than I think I've gone through everything. If I've missed something, I'll hopefully remember it and throw it in here in the middle. I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I teased this when I tweeted the segment yesterday. I wanted to spend some time talking about Calipari's offense and defense, because we've talked a little bit about some things I was hearing about the offense and then what he said in some of these press conferences, but it's really broad strokes, vague stuff. And I've really started thinking about him so far at Arkansas, and it was a big move for him, in my opinion, not just coming from Lexington to Arkansas after 15 years. The moves, to me, the big moves in recruiting were he's going to only go 8 or 9 deep. Well, it's 9 deep in year one. So, in terms of, higher level guys and guys that are going to really factor into the season. The other stuff is just kind of, practice filler, which is important. And maybe there's someone that finds a way to break through. We can't rule that out. But from this vantage point, that's what it is. So that's a change for him. Not that it wasn't always a reality that teams are only going to end up playing 9 or 10 guys, but he's recruiting like that. He's not trying to get guys 10 through 13 that are, probably be starting or playing somewhere else right away. And now they're just in a blog jam at Kentucky or at Arkansas where they recruited a high level. So at Arkansas, it's 8 or 9. That's a big change for him. Another big change for him was drilling down the freshman recruiting to 3 or 4. And so what does that have to do with offensive defense? I'm wondering how the changes and what he's done and has been doing, how those things continue, because here's something significant on the offensive part. I've been paying attention. I've had I've mentioned this a while back. I've repeated a few times. Source telling me to really keep an eye on these 4 levels of his offense in terms of prioritizing first and secondary transition, 1 and 2 of importance, not just because primary and secondary are 1 and 2 numerically, but those will be the most important elements of his offense. The dribble drive offense is still in play with some various action is kind of the 4th part of that. I'm like, well, action are we talking about? Because for the longest time, Calipari ran his offense a certain way. Last year, they brought in John Welch, who's now the associate head coach at Fresno State. He's a guy with a lot of NBA experience. What he did at Kentucky last year was help them improve their pace on offense, play a more modern style, a more space the floor style. But he also, in addition to that, was their key guy in terms of individual player development. And you saw the evidence of guys getting drafted. I mean, and I mentioned the backcourt players. 2 of them going in the lottery. Both were true freshmen in Reed Shepard and Rob Dillingham. You had Antonio Reeves, veteran transfer guard that lit Arkansas up, one of the top scorers in the SEC, got drafted mid-second round. You had the true freshman who was the highest rated player coming in, Edwards, who was a sort of a 3-4, I guess, a 3. He's off to the NBA as well. But you saw a lot of guys that he worked with and helped build the success of that offense. At least they weren't good defensively, ranked outside the top 100. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But offensively, they were top 10 in the country, 6th or 7th when you looked at KenPom's ratings for their offensive efficiency. And a lot of that had to do with John Welch, and they played a little bit differently. So now I'm wondering when Calipari we go all the way. Now go back to what he said in the limited after all the limited practice in June and July when he had that press conference. Into July, he was talking about how they spent the entire month just working on individual development. So then I start to wonder. We saw some of the clips. were any of those carryovers or takeaways from what John Welch was doing? He spent a lot of time, Welch did, on individual development. Did Calipari use some of those things they were doing last year that worked so well? Was some of that stuff he used? The few times that he's talked in front of the media and some of the things he has said, if you listen, he takes a lot, even from high school coaches, things that he sees and learns and figures out what works. Well, a lot worked for Kentucky's offense last year. So I wonder, when they were working on individual development and getting guys out of their comfort zone and having some competitive stuff in that individual development, not team design stuff, but just individual stuff, were they carrying over from what they did last year at Kentucky? Maybe they did. But it also then is there a path from there to when they are implementing offense? How much of last year's offense, in terms of what worked really well, how much does he tweak it? Does he go back to what he knew before John Welch and do some of the stuff they were doing for a long time that caught a lot of criticism when he was at Kentucky over the years? And we've talked about the dribble drive offense. That's been something he's done for a while. And it evolved a little bit, but it was really just different versions of it. When I remember watching Kentucky, I think, some people the biggest phrase is called it's a floppy action. And really what that means is there's more than one way to do it. The most traditional way is a single double, where you have multiple screens going on. You've seen the old traditional offenses where two big men start out kind of free throw line extended or at the elbows, and they immediately do pin down screens. And then you've got two scores. It's usually you've got your lead guard out top initiating offense. He's going to activate the offense, and then you've got your 2 and your 3 running off those screens. And the 3 actually is one of the screens. So why it's called a single double is there's 2 screens. One of the bigs coming off the horn for a pin down screen. You've got the 3 that's setting a screen, and you got your 2 flashing out to the wing as maybe the first primary option potentially. And then you've got the 3 underneath the basket who set one of the first screen, now flaring out on the other pin down screen on the other side where the other big man had stayed on his side of the lane. It's a lot of word salad to say. What happens is, as basketball continued to modernize and there was more spacing and flow and movement, that stuff is good to free players if you're pounding the ball to see what opens up. But there's a lot of holding of the ball. Sometimes it screws up because it doesn't work exactly as planned. It screws up your spacing. It crowds the paint. And it just takes a while for things to happen. And so defenses are kind of, when you get used to other offenses that play more open and free style, defenses are kind of licking their chops because this is maybe an offense where they didn't have to work as hard to cover somebody or to close out on a shot or to, and if the lane's packed, now your driving lanes aren't as clean, and it's just a harder offense. So there was more than one way to do it. I think Kentucky did several that I saw. They had a diamond set where they ran one of their bigs was actually not was more of a mid post on one of the wings or on one of the sides of the lane, and one of them's up closer to one of the horns, and then you had your 3 instead of underneath with the 2, you had them up at the nail, and you're running a flare screen to one side. So instead of having a double screen on one side, you had 2 single screens. Either way, Kentucky tried different things. They even tried a pace version of it, and sometimes their offenses were okay. I said all of that to say I prefer the way Kentucky played last year based on what I saw. And I remember a lot of their teams, what made them so good offensively wasn't necessarily the offensive design. It was the fact that they had really good offensive rebounding teams, and they had teams that were really good that were really good in transition because the way they recruited, they had guys with length, size, athleticism, guys projected to the next level in a year, probably more than most teams had. And so they would just, out athlete folks. And a lot of times their transition, I always talked about how good his best teams were in transition and offensive rebounding. But last year their offense was I think it was the top 3-point shooting offense in the country by percentage. I know it was second only to Alabama in volume last year under John Welch as their offensive guru. But they were top 5 in a lot of other categories. Overall field goal percentage, and scoring per game. I mean, they were really good in so many ways. And so I wanted to talk about all that to say, what is it going to be at Arkansas? Because this week we're going to be, we talk about today, October 9th, kind of being the marker with your pro day, Sean Abayev arrive in the evening, and really the bulk of his visit, I kind of chopped that up early and stumbled around it, is the bulk of his visit start tomorrow. And again, Calipari had an appointment in Little Rock tomorrow. Let's see if that happens and if Abayev makes it. But then as you move through the weekend, Arkansas's got those 2 tip-off tour events, October 12th in Hot Springs, and then October 13th on Sunday in Pine Bluff. And so a lot of that's just fan fun stuff, signing autographs, taking pictures, things like that. But some of it, he said, hey, we'll probably do some drill work and maybe some scrimmaging, some 5-on-5. So maybe we see even a glimpse of what, maybe we're going to see a glimpse even this weekend of what his offensive plan is. But I like the pace that Kentucky played with last year. Not all of his teams, some of them had been clunky over the past, and he had some that were still highly rated offensively. But at the same time, last year, that was one of the best offenses I'd seen. And, obviously the metrics say that as well. But, moving forward, when I look at the pieces that Arkansas actually has, I see a lot of similarities in the design of this roster. I mean, I look at a guy like Nelly Davis, who's going to be, to me, like an Antonio Reeves in terms of a guy coming out of the chutes. You're like, this guy could be the leading scorer in the SEC or one of the top 3 or 4 scorers in this league. And a guy that's versatile, I think probably a better defender potentially than Reeves was. And that's where Arkansas has really got to get better than where Kentucky was last year, ranked outside the top 100 in defense. Adu Thiero, to me, is, if he's improving his 3-point efficiency and his work behind the 3-point line, it only makes him more dangerous because of his ability to slash and be a real threat in that shallow row off 2-man pick and roll game or slip screen game out high. But the offense, they've just got, to me, a Trevor Brazile. Everyone has told me for a while, going back to NBA people, if he comes back to school, he needs to stay at Arkansas. Calipari, what they did last year would be great for him. We'll see. They want him to be more of an attack guy. DJ Wagner, I think, is going to be, I said the floor, he's got a really high floor. We'll see about the ceiling, but he's going to be a reliable lead guard and a guy that I think is probably going to surprise some people if he stays healthy. And then Boogie Fland, you just continue to hear great things about him. Carter Knox looks like a machine now. He's lost weight, really looks good, and he's got a lot of ability. But you go on and on and on. Jonas Adu to me is an opportunistic scorer, but he's a lob threat and a guy that will get out and run. And then I look at Big Z as a guy that's gonna help Arkansas. So I think offensively, he's gonna help Arkansas offensively. Maybe when he's in there for Adu, actually elevate Arkansas's what they can do offensively. So I said all of that to say, if Calipari tries to incorporate the best of work last year with John Welch and his influence on that, if he embraces some of that and brings some of that, to me, it looks like he put this roster together to keep on keeping on with that. And some of the things he's talked about lead me to believe that maybe he's done that. Now, when we talk about defense, that's where Kentucky backslid the last few years, not just last year when they brought Welch in, but before that, Kentucky last year was 109th. The year before that, they were 68th. I think the year before that, they were in the 30s. That was okay. Even their team that lost a bunch in that 2021 season, I think had a losing record, and Arkansas beat them in Rupp. I think that team had like a defense actually that was ranked in the 30s, if I'm not mistaken. I'm going off memory on that, but I may be wrong about that. But it's progressively gotten worse defensively. So that's another thing. When Calipari talks, I want to talk about defense. When he says lately that he thinks they can play with physicality and be more physical, that was his last real talking point in this last press conference, the most recent one we had, week before last at Bud Walton Arena. And so the physicality, that was one of my biggest concerns when I saw him put this thing together, because I felt like Thiero as a wing would be physical. I thought some of the backcourt guys like Nelly, he's a strong rebounder. He can obviously be physical, some of these guys, but I thought the front court, because of what before I had really seen the physical progress of guys like Trevor Brazile and Big Z, they've gotten noticeably, the more you see of them in photos and stuff that's emerged since the summer, you see that they're bigger. And you look at photos comparing them to last year, they're obviously bigger. That bodes well. I think Jonas Adu, yeah, he may not match up with a guy like Zach Edey, and we'll see how he does against Hunter Dickinson. That may be another exhibition game where Arkansas's got to defend by committee and use different guys to crowd him. We'll see what Arkansas does with Calipari here, but that's how they did it last year under a different coaching staff trying to defend him. But Adu wasn't here, and he was at Tennessee where he matched up again twice last year, including the Elite Eight against Zach Edey, and that was tough for him. But for the most part, Adu was wonderful, and a guy that is an all defensive performer coming back now at Arkansas, but coming back into the SEC where he has all that experience. So I think there's a lot of reasons on that front line with guys getting bigger in Big Z and physically getting bigger in Trevor Brazile, beefier, especially upper body, and then what Jonas Adu brings to the table. And I think Adu Thiero, even though he's not somebody, he is switchable. He can defend. He's one of those guys that can defend multiple positions. You could argue 5. I wouldn't want him on a 5 for more than, a couple of possessions maybe, but I think maybe he could bail you out if you needed to because of foul trouble or some other situation where you just need it. Or maybe there's a reason why you want to go small for a few possessions against a team where that could be problematic on the defensive end, but you trust him enough to battle a little bit. But the point is, I think he's a physical guy when you look at him defending threes, and I think he can hold his own at the 4 when he has to help Arkansas as a 4. So, maybe the physicality is not as bad as I thought it would be, or I say bad. It maybe is potentially problematic as I mentioned it might be back in the summer. I think now there's more reason to feel better about that. The 3-point shooting was another thing I talked about as a potential question mark and a potential weakness or being average. That is not answered for us yet. We need to see that how that plays out. And I think the way they ran that offense last year, that's why I go back to that. I think it bodes well for helping guys get into rhythm. Because the better your offense and your flow is, the harder it is for defenses to maintain their on-ball integrity, their help situations, their rotations. The more you challenge a defense, the harder it has to work, and then they break down. And if you're good on your offensive end and people know what's expected of them, and you've got the right chemistry and guys understanding their roles, it's going to help all percentages, including from the 3-point line. It just will. So that's a thing. Where does Calipari go now that he's at Arkansas, and now that John Welch is gone, is on the left coast at Fresno State as associate head coach? Does he use some of those principles? We'll see how that plays out. All right, almost an hour in, 52, 53 minutes. You guys know I like to talk. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. We got a lot more to talk about. If there's news that's breaking while I'm on here, darn it, I missed it, and I'll deal with it afterwards if anything breaking and shaking. I guess we're on Malik Thomas commitment watch at some point because I do think Arkansas is the leader there. Again, the only thing to me that upsets the apple cart is this Kansas State visit and an NIL entanglement. In other words, if he goes to Kansas State, and at the end of the day, I give the advantage to Calipari, regardless. But if it becomes a leverage game, I've already seen some examples, at least 3 back with recruiting when he built this first roster, where Arkansas was thanks but no thanks, and they moved on to the next quality guy. So we just see about that. But I think I really think to me, it may be more likely that he doesn't take the visit. I don't know that. But to me, that may be more likely, and that it's just now a matter of time on announcing a commitment to Arkansas. I do think Arkansas is in the lead there. Again, Sean Abayev, let's see if he's able to get this visit, get on campus or get in town at least today at some point. I'll be checking his Instagram to see when that happens. I'll pop it in it on his IG account to see about that. And then we just keep an eye on some of these other upcoming visits. Do all of them hold? Are there changes? And then again, we've talked about how everything's ramped up here for the exhibition season. Again, today, Pro Day. I mentioned the 2 tip-off tour events in Hot Springs and Pine Bluff, respectively, the 12th and the 13th, Saturday and Sunday of this weekend. And then it's not that long when Arkansas's got Kansas in the house, October 25th. That's a Friday night. You've got the Slobber and Hog on the court. I didn't even talk about that. I'm saying goodbye without mentioning the Slobber and Hog. It's done. That goes back to the Nolan days. Nolan's name's on the court. Nolan's been at the Performance Center. You got John Calipari. You got Hall of Fame coaches flying around in Fayetteville, 2 of the best to ever do it. You've got one of the best roster builds I've ever seen when you basically had to start from scratch. You've got a season about to jump off here. Recruiting's important. We nail that. We're talking about that. It's picked up. Calipari's on the road visits, the bringing guys in. That is all massively picked up. Cal moving past Sealy and Wilson. Well, I talked about Caleb Wilson in this. So go back and watch it if you didn't see, if you came in late or just missed it. I talk a lot. You might have taken a little nap in there, but I did talk about Caleb Wilson. Sealy I didn't bring up. Arkansas offered him, Calipari offered him. We'll see what happens there. He's taking a couple of visits. Let's get through some of the visits that we know about now. I think it's a fair point, though, to bring that up. I didn't mention this last night here in the 501. We got ballers. I went and saw multiple Division I level guys that are still in high school in a pickup run here in Little Rock. Some notable guys in there. One of them is Anton Beard, who's now one of the coaches over at North Little Rock High School. He was in there, did a lot of talking. He was out there for the full hour and a half playing 5-on-5 with some of these younger guys. He showed him a few things and was talking to him the whole time. Well, he's coaching now. He's on that staff over at North Little Rock where he played. Anton Beard started at Parkview, ended up at North Little Rock, one of the top players in the state. Was originally committed to Missouri. Mike Anderson got him, convinced him to come to Arkansas. And even as a true freshman, he had a role and had a big impact on teams that started making it to the NCAA tournament at Arkansas when there'd been a 5-year drought of nothing but just ugliness. No postseason outside a one and done in the SEC tournament there for a 5-year stretch. And Anton Beer was part of that success. But he was in there. A couple of kids, I'll mention this. This young man's been on unofficial visits to Arkansas. Anthony Hester, 6'6" wing at Little Rock Mills. He's got offers just got one from Arkansas State, has one from UAPB, another one from McNeese State. He told me that earlier in the day yesterday, UCA was out to see him, but he's been on an unofficial visits to Arkansas with the previous staff. Jacob Hester, I like him a lot. Kellen Robinson, KK's younger brother. Arkansas will play against KK in Bud Walton Arena with the Slobbering Hog, all OVC last year at Little Rock, and that team won that conference under Darrell Walker. But Kellen, his younger brother Kellen, who's been a top 100 rated 4-star and has some high major looks, he'll be a senior at Bryant. He was out there last night. Jacob Lanier was in the building. He's on a few days of a break from Arizona Compass Prep, top 25 rated player in the country, still a 4-star, but a high-level guy that showed out at Pangos All-American Camp and just had a really nice run at Wooten's camp, which is a McDonald's All-American Game platform showcase, and was listed on Paul Biancardi of ESPN, his top performers at that event. He's in town for a short break, but he was in the gym last night, not allowed to run 5-on-5. Their coaches at Arizona Compass Prep said don't do it. So he was just kind of, hanging out and taking some shots before they started, shooting around a little bit before they started playing. I interviewed him. I haven't tweeted that out yet. And we talked a little recruiting, but Jake Lemonier's a guy that Arkansas's had some interest in. There's basketball. I mean, I live it, breathe it. There's always stuff to talk about. And now I am going to get almost to an hour, 58 minutes. I promise to cut it short. Thank you for joining me on HogvilleNET YouTube Live. If anything breaks that we need to come on, we'll jump back on in 15 minutes. If not, until the next time, thank you for being here, and I'll see you then.